Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today I want to ponder the question, is it ever okay to ban a book? So let me get my one-word answer to that question out of the way straight away, and that answer is no, which I imagine is the word that many of you have been shouting at the screen since I posed that question in the intro. So no, I don't think it's okay to ban books, and by and large I don't think it's okay to censor books. However, I do think there's one particular scenario where people are much less concerned about the banning and censoring of books. And I want to talk about that a bit later on in this video. But first, I just wanted to talk about the topic more generally, because I think it's an interesting and important topic. And this video was inspired largely by MJ from the channel Reading This Life. So MJ is doing a project this year where she's aiming to read 24 banned books during the year. So 24 in 24. And she's encouraging other people to take part. So I will link to her announcement video for that in the description for this video, so you can watch it if you haven't already. So I think that's a really noble thing to be doing. I think it's really important that, you know, people like us on BookTube champion books that are being banned or challenged in some way. And that word challenged is one that comes up a lot in videos about banned books, because I think often when we talk about books being banned, we're not talking about blanket bans. We're not talking about books being completely unavailable in a country or something like that. What we're actually talking about is books being challenged in the school system, in school libraries, which is something that seems to be happening, you know, frequently in the US. It happens far less over here, although I'm sure it does happen in some instances. But it's definitely something that is a big concern for many people in the United States. Scott from the channel Gunpowder Fiction and Plot put up an excellent video the other day where he was talking about genuinely banned books. So a video which I think was called something like banned books you've never heard of, where he talked about books that have actually been banned in, you know, whole countries. So I'll link to that video as well, because it's well worth watching. So I think there are different levels of banning, aren't there? Banning a book outright in a country is clearly more severe than, you know, limiting access to it in, you know, public libraries or school libraries. But both are bad things, and both will have an impact. And, you know, particularly for young people who may be going through difficult times in their life and who need access to information that will help them through those times. School libraries may be a primary source of information. So books being taken out of school libraries that may help them, I think, is a terrible thing. There's another side, though, to the kind of ban books and censoring of books argument, which is quite interesting. So when you think about books being challenged in school libraries, I think we tend to think about, you know, conservative groups doing that, religious groups, concerned parent groups, that kind of thing. When we talk about censorship of books, I think it's often liberal people that we think about doing that. So people who are concerned about, you know, the presence of outdated, like, racist language and things like that in books. So recently, you know, in the past year, there's been a lot of discussion on BookTube about the fact that some of Agatha Christie's books had been issued in new editions by the publisher that removed racist and offensive language. And, you know, the same has happened with Roald Dahl and Ian Fleming. So publishers, you know, as they own the rights to these books, particularly where the author is dead, do have the right to publish different versions of them. And in these cases, I think they have done that largely for commercial reasons. But it's an interesting question to ponder. If you censor a book, if you re-edit a book to remove certain words and make that the only version that people can go out and buy, are you effectively banning the original version of that book? And you kind of are, albeit, you know, with authors like Fleming and Dahl and Christie, there will be hundreds of thousands of second-hand copies of their books floating around, easily available, that will have the original text in. Christie is a particularly interesting case in that she did sanction removal of particularly anti-Semitic terms from some of her books after the Second World War. And whilst there might be fans of Agatha Christie who want to make sure they've got copies of her books that don't contain the most recent edits, I'm imagining they're not going back and trying to get copies of books from the 30s that contain the anti-Semitic language that Christie herself asked to be removed. And I think that, for me, is the interesting point. That's the one scenario where people are much less concerned about censorship and banning. And the book that got me thinking about all of this is a book that is banned, that is effectively unavailable to buy, but it's unavailable because it was withdrawn by the author. And that book is Rage by Stephen King. So Rage is a very early Stephen King novel. He wrote it when he was a teenager. It was subsequently published under the pseudonym Richard Bachman and was then published in the 80s in a collected edition with other books that have been published under that pseudonym. Rage is a book about a shooting in a high school where the central character, who is the shooter, is effectively something of an anti-hero. And you definitely feel, reading the book, that King has some sympathy for him as a character. Now, that book was subsequently linked to actual high school shootings. So there were a number of school shootings in the States where it was found afterwards that the shooter had read Rage, had read that book, and to an extent had been influenced by it. And King subsequently decided he didn't want that book in circulation anymore. So he told his publishers to stop publishing it. So you cannot buy that collected edition of the Bachman books anymore that has Rage in it. You can't buy it as a standalone book. You can still find second-hand copies of it, clearly, but you cannot buy new copies of Rage. And that is an instance where people are not up in arms about that book being withdrawn because the author themselves has made that decision. And creators do that sometimes. So King did it with Rage. Stanley Kubrick, and people outside of the UK may not be aware of this, but Stanley Kubrick did it with the film version of A Clockwork Orange. So when A Clockwork Orange was first released, Kubrick got, in the UK, some death threats, I believe, from someone, and decided that he wasn't comfortable on the basis of that. He didn't want the film to be shown in the UK. So for many years, you could not watch A Clockwork Orange legally in the UK. It was not legal to show it in a cinema. You couldn't get it on video or DVD or anything like that. And indeed, when a cinema in London tried to challenge that ban, the Scala Cinema, Kubrick sued them out of existence. So he sued them, and the legal cost bankrupted them, and the cinema had to close. And that continued until the time that Kubrick died, when the studio immediately released it on DVD. So an interesting case where, another case where a creator, in this case a director rather than an author, has made the decision to remove a work. Which brings me to my final question, which is one I think is interesting, but which I don't have an answer to. And that is, if King hadn't withdrawn Rage from publication, would people be lobbying for it to be removed from publication? Given its links to a number of school shootings, and the fact that it appears that it influenced the shooters in those cases, would people be asking for it to be banned if King hadn't banned it himself? So I hope you found that interesting. Do let me know what you think in the comment. Do you agree with me that self-banning and self-censorship by authors, by creators, is much more acceptable than other forms of banning? So yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know if you've got an answer to that final question. And as always, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're safe and well out there. I hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.